Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are embarking on an incredible, chaotic, and just frankly fascinating 300-year journey. We're looking at the foundation of Argentina. We'll be tracing its origins from this fragile, mud-soaked coastal settlement way back in the 16th century, all the way to a booming, constitutionally grounded republic by the late 19th century. This is a story of failure, resilience, high-stakes geopolitical chess, and ultimate rebellion. Let's get started.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The first foundations. 2. Rise of the Viceroyalty. 3. Sparks of Revolution. 4. Declaring independence. And finally 5. The Foreign Talisman.
Before we get into the really granular details, I want you to keep this macro timeline in your mental model. As you'll see, we're looking at a slow buildup of pressure, transforming from a distant, overlooked colony into a thriving port, then a fierce local militia, and finally, a fully sovereign constitutional republic.
Chapter 1. The First Foundations, From Failure to Permanence. So did you know the foundation of Buenos Aires actually happened twice? Yeah, the first attempt in 1536 by Spanish conqueror Pedro de Mendoza was, well, a complete disaster. The settlement was destroyed by indigenous peoples, and the surviving, starving inhabitants had to abandon it entirely by 1541. It actually took the Spanish crown 40 years to try again. When Juan de Garay finally repopulated the area in 1580, he didn't even sail from Spain. He came down the river from Asuncion. And to convince the so-called founding neighbors to actually stay in this super precarious rudimentary spot, Garay had to offer some pretty serious bribes, land grants, and crucially, horses and livestock. It was a really rough start for what would eventually become a massive metropolis.
Let's move to Chapter 2. Rise of the Viceroyalty. A geopolitical shift. For a long time, the region was governed all the way from Lima under the Viceroyalty of Peru. But the Spanish king, Charles III, eventually realized this territory was just way too vast for one viceroy to control. Plus, you had Portuguese expansion creeping in from Brazil and constant British colonial threats. This forced a major geopolitical shift. The Spanish crown created the Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata, which essentially decentralized power and made Buenos Aires its capital. Suddenly, significant military and administrative resources were flowing straight into the city.
Now, what's really interesting about this era is the sheer paradox of colonial life in Buenos Aires. With the new viceroyalty, the city became a flourishing port, flush with commercial revenues and, let's be honest, plenty of illicit contraband. But despite this newfound political power and wealth, the residents lacked basic self-reliance. Even the absolute wealthiest families often lived in bare rooms without everyday household items. Why? Because goods like fine china had to arrive exclusively on Spanish ships, and by the time they made that treacherous journey across the ocean, they were almost always shattered. So you had a city that was incredibly rich on paper, yet entirely dependent in practice.
Chapter 3. Sparks of Revolution. The Dominoes Fall.
The road to the May Revolution of 1810 was paved by falling dominoes worldwide. First, U.S. independence proved that breaking away from a parent state was actually possible. Then, in 1806 and 1807, the British invaded the Rio de la Plata. The Spanish viceroy literally fled, which meant the local criollos, Spanish-born in the Americas, had to step up and defend the city themselves. Doing so made them realize, hey, we have real military strength. But the biggest shock came from Europe. Napoleon invaded Spain, captured King Ferdinand VII, and by 1810, the Spanish resistance junta had completely fallen. Almost overnight, local authorities' legitimacy just evaporated.
This brings us right to May 1810 in Buenos Aires. Imagine the ground-level tension here. It's pouring rain outside, and a restless crowd is gathered in the plaza outside the Cabildo, the town hall. Inside, intense, high-stakes debates are happening over who should rule. Manuel Belgrano, a key revolutionary figure, is standing by a window. He has this secret emergency plan. If the Cabildo betrays the revolutionaries, he's going to wave a white cloth, signaling the armed crowd to force their way inside. Thankfully, the signal wasn't needed. The crowd's demands were met, the viceroy was ousted, and local leadership officially formed the Primera Junta.
But here we encounter one of the most fascinating historical debates of this entire era, famously known as the Mask of Ferdinand VII. When the Primera Junta took power, they officially swore allegiance to the captive Spanish king. Now you might be wondering, why? Was this a genuine pledge of loyalty by people who really just wanted better local administration? Or was it a highly calculated ruse, a mask, designed to slowly usher in full independence without immediately shocking a population that wasn't quite ready for radical change?
Historians today still passionately debate this point. But whatever their true intentions, what is undeniably clear is that the wheels of self-governance were now fully in motion.
Chapter 4. Declaring Independence, Breaking the Bonds.
Fast forward 6 years to July 9, 1816, at the Congress of Tucumán. Delegates from the various provinces finally made their definitive legal break, and this brilliantly illustrates their mindset at the time. They explicitly cited the unnatural bonds of the Spanish crown and reclaimed their absolute sovereignty. This was it, the point of no return, launching the new nation headfirst into the very real, very messy realities of self-determination.
We absolutely have to pause here for a second to acknowledge the massive influence of Manuel Belgrano on the foundation of this state. The man was a true polymath. He was a diplomat, the creator of the national flag, which the Congress of Tucumán officially adopted, and a vital military commander fighting the royalists. Intriguingly, he even proposed what was known as the Inca Plan. This was a fascinating push to create a constitutional monarchy headed by a descendant of the Inca Empire aimed at uniting the broader continent. And while it actually had the support of heavyweights like San Martín, it was ultimately rejected by the delegates from Buenos Aires.
Despite all his immense contributions, Belgrano's end was, frankly, deeply tragic. By 1820, his own army had mutinied. The nascent country was fracturing into a bitter civil war without a clear central government, and Belgrano lay dying of illness. His reported last words, "Oh, my homeland," carry such incredible emotional weight. It really sets a somber tone for the decades of violent civil strife between Unitarians and Federalists that would soon completely consume the region.
And finally, Chapter 5, The Foreign Talisman, a Constitution for Stability.
So, how do you fix a deeply fractured region? Well, the answer lies in looking outward. By the 1850s, the Argentine elite recognized they lacked the entrenched political traditions needed to build a stable system from scratch, so they looked to a highly successful foreign model. As detailed in this fascinating academic analysis, the drafters of the 1853 and 1860 Argentine constitutions deliberately adopted U.S. constitutional practice. But it wasn't just as a handy template, they used it to inject much-needed legitimacy into their own fragile government. So the crucial point here is this brilliant concept of talismanic authority. The philosopher Hegel argued that you can't just copy a constitution, it has to organically reflect a nation's soul. But the Argentine elite proved that sometimes copying is exactly what works. They treated the U.S. constitutional model like a talisman, an object of almost magical prestige. Because their own domestic institutions were incredibly weak, invoking the authority of a proven, successful foreign system gave the new Argentine laws an undeniable, almost unquestionable power. It literally unified a fractured elite through sheer prestige.
And the results of finally achieving this constitutional stability? I mean, they were absolutely staggering. By harnessing this framework, Argentina ignited an explosive economic boom in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Just look at the numbers. The population grew by 3.4% a year, heavily fueled by massive European emigration, and real GDP growth topped 5% annually for decades. To put that into perspective, by 1913, Argentina was neck and neck with Japan for the title of the fastest-growing economy in the entire world. The chaotic foundation had finally yielded incredible prosperity.
From a completely abandoned, muddy settlement to a global economic powerhouse, the 300-year foundation of Argentina is a profound testament to resilience and strategic reinvention. But it leaves us with a really provocative thought on the nature of nation building. Can a nation's identity be truly independent if its most foundational, stabilizing laws were deliberately borrowed from a foreign talisman? It's a fascinating paradox, for sure, and one that encourages us to look closely at how every single modern nation constructs its own authority. Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and keep exploring history.